Today I'm going to be talking all about like how Animal Crossing has been used in protests and also specifically how it's used in the Philippine context during the pandemic. The Junk Terror Bill protest, which I'll be talking about, is not the first instance where it was used. It started around the use of it started around March, especially when Rodrigo Duterte shut down a major Philippine news network because of because they were criticizing his regime. Now, to give you a little bit of a context on that as well, this is because of Rodrigo Duterte's war on drugs that started in 2016, which killed thousands, particularly in a lot of less privileged communities, especially in what he was doing is he was saying that drug addicts are they need to be eliminated. So and he used his police to pretty much round up a lot of people, and there were mass arrests, especially in 2016. And the thing with this is that in 2016 we were still counting around. There was like around 7,000, but it got so much that people stopped counting. So we don't know the number at the moment. And what was happening during the pandemic, he was using the pandemic to actually tighten more of the restrictions. So I remember when my mom was talking about how it was in 2020, there were checkpoints in every corner. So you have to go, if you're in Manila, you have to visit like 11 checkpoints to wherever you are. So they were using the lockdowns as a way of containing a lot of people and banning a lot of like gatherings for protests. So and this became a little bit the double standard was a lot, especially given that during the protest, this is the police chief. He had a small birthday celebration that defied a lot of the lockdowns. This is a picture of the police captains that he gathered for his small birthday celebration. And when it got leaked to the press, it was like, oh, it's a small mañanita. Now, a mañanita in context is a small birthday party, mostly of immediate family members, and we got this tradition from the Spanish colonial period. So what happened as a result after that? People started doing small mañanita protests in response. And this is probably one of the biggest ones. This was in UP Diliman. This is in protest of the terror bill, because the terror bill is a bill that Duterte introduced in order to it's a broad, they've defined terrorism broadly, and you could pretty much insert activism as terrorism. Anything that goes against the government is terrorism. So that was happening, and the little small mañanita was happening. So this is what people did in reaction. But one of the more significant ones is the use of Animal Crossing. Now, what's interesting with this is that in the use of Animal Crossing is that when they were protesting in Animal Crossing, they were also using Animal Crossing to protest other issues that were also in tie up with a lot of the tightening of the restrictions. Now, what exactly are we seeing here? These are forms of digital sociality, but what we see here too are extensions of more local forms of sociality in digital spaces, because especially the Mañanita has its traditions, but it became a thing in Animal Crossing, and especially it helps with Animal Crossing. You only have eight. You can only invite a maximum of 8 people, so it is perfect for a mañanita. So people have been using it there. So we got the emergent forms of local sociality in these digital spaces, and also we see the use of games as forms of tactical media. And this is significant because Nintendo did not make it to be so, but players are finding ways, and that's awesome, I think. And that's pretty much I think what we need to celebrate, but also keep looking at. Now, so as this is an ongoing study, these are some of the questions that I have specifically, because what I want to do with this is I want to do interviews for this, and I have some of the questions that I want to tackle, for example, how do protester identities link with gamer identities, and especially do protesters specifically identify as gamers at all, even, and with the game's use of Twitter and Facebook, because a lot of these protests were put up on Twitter, and people were putting out some of the codes for their islands on social media. So please join us. Please join us on our little party. So, and what do these imply about games, and especially in connection to connected media ecology? Like, what do these transnational linkages imply about international forms of solidarity, and what do these protesters feel about these other movements? These are things that I kind of want to find out via interviews. And lastly, what do games as global spaces imply about forms of local organization? So like, and there's of course the thing here about, like, especially in the Philippines, we have a huge diaspora community. So like there's a like huge transnational exchange happening even within games itself, because like these forms of media are being used to connect people who are within the Philippines and who are in the diaspora. In my case, I'm in the diaspora. I joined some of this as a part of the diaspora. So there are like a lot of conversations here, like with games becoming as part of global spaces.
So as the central figure of my talk, I'm interested in thinking about the NPC, the non-playable character, as indexing a subject position in digital life, a subject position that I hope to suggest is at times racialized and gendered, not necessarily only in its representation, but also in its logic. What set of meanings does the figure of the NPC offer? How does the racialized and gendered body attune to a type of computational or procedural logic? And why NPC culture, if we can call that a thing, and why now? So I won't necessarily have time today to answer all of these questions in my talk, but they are here to just illustrate the impetus behind some of my thinking in this new research. What are NPCs? And I think most of you in this audience have a working sense of this, but NPC stands for non-playable characters that are distinct from a player's in-game controllable avatar. NPCs have entered new arenas of digital culture, where this particular non-playable form has achieved meme status. And there are a few different notable examples in the past 5-ish years that showcase how the figure of the NPC has become a viral meme. But one recent phenomenon that really caught my attention was the viral sensation of NPC streaming on TikTok, where content creators acted as NPCs for their viewership by enacting a set of pre-programmed responses. These embodied gestures and reactions are in exchange often for microtransactional tips given by the viewers, where part of the interactive component of the live stream was tied into the spectacle generating feedback loop of economically participating in the stream. The most notable feature being the soft and often sexualized bouncing that mimic in-game animation of NPCs, and adding dynamism to in-game characters that would otherwise appear overly static or decorative. I'm fascinated by how a type of digital avatarial production in the form of an NPC elicits a viral social media spectacle vis-a-vis a particular type of performed animatedness, brought forth by enacting repetitive pre-programmed gestures and lines. NPC blends various digital subcultures together, for example, gaming culture, sex work, and sensorial media such as ASMR content. The faces of the viral meme sensation of NPC streaming are streamers like Pinky Doll and others like Cherry Crush, who often introduces herself as, quote, your very own AI Tamagotchi, end quote, referring to the 90s digital pet craze. Shortly after their popularity, however, the online focus began to shift to the originator of NPC streaming, Natsu Koko, a Japanese TikTok creator who began streaming on the social media platform in 2021. In her early streams, Natsu Koko embodied the familiar NPC sway and bob, the recognizable animation drift that characterized the in-game presence of a digital figure. Her signature gray cat ears, doll-like makeup, and her playful roboticism were a constant throughout the various NPC personas that she has portrayed, drawing from Japanese cosplay and anime culture. However, for today, I'm interested in thinking through what these examples of NPC streaming, particularly as they surround Natukoko's distinctly Japanese expression of NPCs means in the age of AI technologies and discourse. While conversations surrounding Natukoko's NPC stream often focused on topics reminiscent of cultural erasure or content appropriation, arguing for Natukoko as the original NPC streamer from Japan instead of the North American streamers, I'm fascinated by how Natukoko's Japaneseness is coextensive with what one user has called her as the, quote, original AI queen. The phenomenon of NPC streaming might offer clues for how race manifests as logic within the rise of what some might call AI culture, the blend of AI generation as technologically inflected forms of cultural expression spanning all sorts of media objects. The search for the origins of NPC streaming, for instance, which yielded the fame of Natukoko for a Western social media audience, reflects a narrative impulse to situate the unbelievability of technologically compromised human expression within a familiar and situated cultural narrative of globalized Japanese aesthetics. I hope to suggest that game studies, especially Asian Americanist approaches to game studies, might have lots to offer the broader conversation about AI culture as it is quickly emerging and shifting. This is especially true as digital games as an industry have been at the forefront of new technological innovation, from VR to the role of AI within game worlds, where AI has been used increasingly to experiment with the interactive capacities of NPCs. The critical lexicon developed by Asian American studies of racialization might allow us to better understand these new genres of communication that require us not to locate Asianness within a particular cultural or aesthetic skin, but in the procedural animation that circulate broadly within the horizon of innovation and the technologically new.
Y'all, I'm really excited to talk about Hallyu Heels and global immobilities in professional League of Legends as Gyopo media history. With the question of how we can think about what that might do or might not do in the case of ethnic minorities and minoritized populations living within sort of the imperial metropoles, right? Which I hear call the Korean problem in sort of an homage to the Japan problem pointed out by Robbins and Morley. We pointed out in a chapter talking broadly about this Korean problem that in particular StarCraft 2 and StarCraft 1 had really, as esports ecosystems, struggled to simultaneously support sort of neoliberal free competition between whoever defined the best players and the ability to market their esports as sort of narratively driven, resonant, profit-generating systems, right? That StarCraft 2 had at a certain point a homogenous cast of competitors and deadened interest from some Americans and Europeans, aka white people largely, right, who didn't have a local player to root for, right? Many Koreans also couldn't give interviews in English and spoke with respect towards opponents instead of talking trash, which made for weak drama, and most of the Korean players had meek personas. Now, apart from being this sort of reiteration of, robotic Asian techno-orientalism stuff, this maps out the central question that I think Riot Games recognized pretty early on that they were going to have to contend with. They had a Korean problem. What would happen if South Korean players started going to other regions like they had in StarCraft, competing, stomping the absolute crap out of everybody local, and establishing themselves as sort of overlords of these various regional scenes where they sort of are assumed not to belong? And their solution was to monetize it, right? Not to solve it initially. The sort of international viability of League of Legends esports is built around pitting this sort of East versus West narrative, pitting this sort of disenfranchised white game creator versus the Asian other who takes the game, turns it into a professional esport, turns it into work, turns it into a job that they're just better at inherently on some level, turns it into an underdog story, right? Where the profit driving motive isn't, or like the means of profit production isn't built around like North America and Europe having a fair shot, right? It's actually built around North America being trash. It's built around this sort of reiterative, are you trying harder? Is there a sense that the gap between Korea and the rest of the world is closing? Is there a sense that you're making progress in terms of putting up a good fight, right? At least until 2014, right? In 2014, we have what's called the Korean exodus within the League of Legends community, where I would say somewhere between a third and half of the players from the South Korean Regional League left South Korea, right? And all of a sudden the Korean problem and its resonance with Yellow Peril is kind of real. As I said before, this is sort of founded in this sort of the Ludo-Orientalist question of how is this game is right, and what happens when we start to see the rules of games change, and how does that affect racialization. But it's also important to keep in perspective here, because to me, the one really interesting group of excluded people as sort of like, I don't know, like on the mind of the people writing these rules within professional League of Legends are Asian Americans, right? We regularly see a heavy representation of East Asian American men on esports teams as players, as coaches, what have you. And this sort of region locking policy is instituted specifically to try and curtail certain forms of Asian immigration related to esports labor. It brings us to this, I guess, theorization of mine of Gyeopogam and Gyeopo media. Gyeopo is a generally kind of derogatory Korean language word for used to refer to diaspora, particularly Korean peninsular diasporas who've, gone off elsewhere. Gam as a suffix refers to a certain feeling of or a hunch of something. So in this case, we're dealing with sort of the feeling or hunch of Gyeopo-ness. And I argue that this is sort of a historical inheritance that's tied up in all of these sort of threads of racialization, building national identity, ethnicity, and contending with sort of tensions between the global and the local. And it positions the model minority and perpetual foreigner as sort of a trans-Pacific bind, right? It breaks it out of sort of the political borders of the US and Canada. Part of this project is reconciling I guess Asian Americanness and it with a minoritized longue durée, which refers to this school of history where basically they wanted to contend with interplaying temporalities and spatialities back in like the 40s and 50s before people thought about history that way. And their argument was basically that like we need to contend with the ways that like climate time and geologic time can affect the sort of flare-up watershed historical events that we run into, right? And so I would argue that these questions of Gyeopogam and this feeling of like being Asian American and also being this like, sojourner nationalism traitor is sort of bound up in a longer set of histories than perhaps we initially read, right? This reiterates that long-term Asian American like ambivalent racialization where you're both the tool that is going to help North America beat the Undertaker, and you are the threat to North American jobs, and indeed to the very livelihood of the entire the esport as industry, as ecosystem, right? So I think there's just an interesting interplay of sort of racialization and materiality there that's worth us continuing to contend with.